You've probably heard me say that one of the things that you should strive for if you really want to be effective as a performer in our changing world, in our wacky, who knows what's coming kind of world, is to have a bias for action. And recently there was a great illustration of the difference between a bias for action and a really weird knee-jerk reaction. There is a difference, and I want to talk about that difference in this episode of the VO Heroes podcast. So, recently, could be any number of different moments, but recently there were some issues with our airlines in this country. Problem with software, grounded a bunch of flights, canceled a bunch of flights. And people were scrambling. People were trying to figure out how to take care of their schedules, their itineraries, their trips, etc. And having a bias for action rather than, oh, well, let's just go home. You know, it makes a difference. And then there were people who did this. This is a screenshot from Reddit, which I find to be endlessly entertaining. And not just Am I the Asshole subreddit, but all these other Reddits. And this just was on the front page, and I went and I looked at this and I thought to myself, this is not having a bias for action. You know, they essentially canceled their American Express credit cards with Delta. They had Delta-branded American Express credit cards or something. And they did this because they were so upset with Delta for screwing up their trips. I don't see how this helps. You know, having a bias for action means having a bias for something that's effective when you're looking at it. And you may have to go through a number of actions to find something that is effective. But having a knee-jerk reaction that's simply emotional, it's not Amex's fault. It's not the credit card processor's fault. The money is barely going to be going to Delta if there's any revenue share off of a credit card. There's already very small margins. I'm sure none of this passed through that couple's head when they decided that the way to get back at Delta for screwing up their trip was to cancel their credit cards. When you have a bias for action, take just a moment and say, okay, is this something that's an emotional reaction just because I'm upset, just because I'm frustrated, just because I'm angry? Or is this something that is going to move me toward my goal? As opposed to not doing anything to move you toward your goal. If anything, this did not move them toward any goal of fixing what was going wrong with their trips. In fact, if anything, it made it harder. So it's not a bias for action, anything, anytime. It is a bias for action with some, maybe minimal, but some thought to it. How is this going to affect the situation? How is this going to affect the correction of whatever is going wrong for me? When you have an option, just take a moment, take a breath, and then move forward. What I want to avoid with the concept of a bias for action, why I encourage you to have a bias for action when it comes to performing, writing, etc. You know, just sit down and write. Just sit down and do work. Just sit down and, you know, have a leaning towards doing something rather than not doing something. That's the sum and substance of why I say have a bias for action, because inaction, no action whatsoever, if I just leave it alone, you know, that rarely moves the dial. We do have another episode, I'm realizing as I'm saying it, about how some problems just work themselves out if you're patient. But there's some bedrock to that that's a little bit different from this. Try to be kind to yourself when you're having this bias for action, and ask yourself, is this cutting my nose off to spite my face, or is this actually going to move me toward my goal? Tell me what you think. When you saw that screenshot, what did you think? Did you think, oh, why did they do that? Or did you think, oh, good for them? You know, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this, what your thoughts are on having a bias for action, giving thought to that action. You can hit the like button. You can hit the subscribe button to subscribe to my channel. Notification bell will let you know when the next episode comes out. Leave me a comment on voheroes.com. That's where the conversation is nice and respectful, and we have a bias for action there. And if you want to share this with another performer or writer that you feel like really jumps to conclusions and does things just a little bit too quickly and a little bit thoughtlessly, feel free. I'm not casting aspersions. I'm trying to help. Just trying to help. I'd appreciate that. I'm David H. Lawrence, the 17th. I thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I will see you in the next episode of the VO Heroes podcast.